Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners. Welcome back to the podcast and thanks for tuning in to this solo episode all about stubborn fat. I want to cover why it is that it's harder to lose fat in some body parts than others, what determines where we store our body fat and the speed at which we can lose it, what determines our stubborn fat areas where we store fat in general and how fast we can lose it, and realistic strategies to get rid of stubborn fat, if that's even possible. But before I get into it, I want to give a shout out to the anonymous follower who inspired this podcast by submitting the following questions via my NGL link on my Instagram stories. They asked, what are the different types of fat that make up our bodies? And do you lose different types at different rates during fat loss? It was these questions that gave me the inspiration for this podcast and for a blog article that I'm going to be releasing at the same time as this episode comes out on the exact same topic. So whoever you are, thank you so much. And if you, dear listeners, want to ask me your questions, you can do so once a week on my Instagram story. I got into the habit of putting up a Q&A box that you can respond to anonymously or by letting me know who you are, depending on how comfortable you are with that. And now, without further ado, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this podcast episode. First of all, I'm going to start with what determines fat storage patterns. And the answer is sex and genetics, which means that your fat storage pattern is not under your control. You can't do much about it. In general, most people assigned female at birth, or AFAB, tend to store body fat in their thighs, limbs, chest, and around their reproductive organs, whereas most people assigned male at birth, or AMAB, store more body fat in their stomach and lower back. Not only is the fat storage pattern different, but the type of fat is also different, in that AFAB people often have more subcutaneous adipose tissue than visceral adipose tissue compared to AMAB people. In other words, they have more fat underneath the skin, subcutaneous, than around the internal organs, visceral. However, after menopause, or as a result of taking testosterone as part of your medical transition, your AFAB typical fat storage pattern can shift to a more AMAB typical pattern, with an increase in visceral adipose tissue in the abdomen. Now, the reason why this is important, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a detour here, is that visceral fat poses a greater threat to your metabolic health and all-cause mortality, which is death from any cause, than your subcutaneous fat. If you carry too much visceral fat, you're more likely to develop metabolic syndrome, which is a host of conditions, including hypertension, which is high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, which indicates issues with your blood lipids like high cholesterol, insulin resistance, and abdominal obesity. And in turn, metabolic syndrome can result in serious health problems like cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Fortunately, there was a meta-analysis of 89 studies conducted in 2017 that shows that all of the following fat loss strategies appear to successfully decrease both your subcutaneous fat and your visceral fat over time. And these strategies are diets with or without physical activity, weight loss promoting drugs like GLP-1 agonists, the most famous of which is semaglutide, which is marketed as Ozempic in the US, and finally bariatric surgery. So while visceral fat is more dangerous, we can get rid of it even if we develop an excessive amount or we store an excessive amount due to our body fat storage pattern. Now, detour over back onto stubborn fat. In addition to storing fat unevenly throughout the body, depending on sex and genetics, as I've just explained, we also all have areas from which we lose fat more slowly than others, which is where the very scientific term stubborn fat, in quotation marks, originated from. Now, how do we lose it? First off, let's get an important clarification out of the way. Stubborn fat is no different from the other body fat you carry, so a calorie deficit is paramount if you want to lose it. During a fat loss phase, you're going to lose fat from your entire body over time, but your stubborn areas are going to take the longest, which means that the most obvious solution to lose your stubborn fat is to continue dieting until you've lost it all. I already know what you're thinking. If it's that easy, why is everyone always complaining about how hard it is to lose stubborn fat? Well, here's the catch. The longer you spend in a calorie deficit, the more body fat you lose, and the lower the body fat percentage you're trying to achieve, the more challenging the diet becomes. And that's especially true if you hold a healthy amount of body fat for your size. So you're not overweight, and you don't have obesity, you don't have excess body fat to lose, but you're still trying to get leaner for aesthetic reasons. In that case, the diet is going to be more challenging because if you don't have excess body fat, the body doesn't want to give it up as easily. And since it can be so challenging, many people simply don't diet for long enough and thus don't get lean enough to uncover, so to speak, these stubborn areas. And in some cases, in order to remove all the fat you'd like from those stubborn areas, you may even need to get to a body fat percentage that's too challenging for you to maintain. And there are two reasons why this particular body fat percentage, this particular level of leanness may be too challenging to hold on to. The most common reason is that there's a mismatch between the lifestyle that you want to live and the lifestyle that's required to maintain that level of leanness. Because the smaller the body you choose to live in, the lower your maintenance calories. Therefore, maintaining a very lean physique can become a struggle if you have to do more physical activity than you have time and desire for, and or you need to eat fewer calories than you'd like to. The other reason is that if you're trying to maintain a lower body fat percentage than your body is comfortable with, then you're going to experience undesirable side effects, such as constant hunger and food focus, high fatigue all the time, low libido, difficulty sleeping, mood swings, and several other side effects that typically have to do with a reduction in some important hormones like your thyroid and your sex hormones. And that's why it's not only harder, but it's also inadvisable for your long-term health to stay in such shape. And when I say that you're trying to maintain a lower body fat percentage than your body can sustain, I'm referring to a model, a theoretical model that I've mentioned countless times on the podcast because I find it really fascinating. And it was developed by a researcher called Speakman and colleagues, and it's called the Dual Intervention Point Model. And I'm going to put a link to an article that discusses it, but I've also covered it in more depth in another podcast episode, and that was episode 53 why you stop sticking to your diet and what to do about it. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes as well. Having said that, achieving an unsustainable body fat percentage is a lot more common among bodybuilders and physique athletes, whether competitive or non-competitive, as it's a relatively extreme endeavor. So most people who want to get a little bit healthier and look a bit leaner are unlikely to reach this point. Now, moving on, whichever of the two reasons it is that explains why you're struggling to stay lean enough to see definition in your stubborn areas, the most reasonable choice right now would be to accept that attempting to stay this lean isn't a feasible strategy for you, with the key phrase being right now, because this could change in the future. For example, by building more muscle, you can lower your overall body fat percentage while maintaining the same body weight. So your scale weight may not change, but you are going to look leaner and you are going to hold less body fat. In addition, assuming that the problem is the lifestyle mismatch, by spending time maintaining the leanest physique that's currently realistic for you, you're also going to hone your ability to stick to the healthy habits that are required to maintain this physique, obviously. And the more experience you gain doing this, the easier it becomes to maintain even those habits that might have seemed unattainable in the past. This may be the first time that you're as lean as you get at the end of your next fat loss phase. So if it's your first time, it's going to feel challenging to maintain that level of leanness, but you're going to get used to it over time. And in the future, you may choose to reduce your body fat percentage further with another fat loss phase or multiple fat loss phases. And by spending long enough at maintenance calories, living in that new leaner body, you can learn to maintain a leaner and leaner physique over time. Now, there's also another solution to change the appearance of stubborn fat, which is to emphasize muscle growth in the same area. Because the less muscle you have in any particular body part, the leaner you're going to need to get in order to see any definition, especially where you carry stubborn fat. On the other hand, if you have bigger muscles, you need to lose less fat overall in order to make them visible. However, it's important that you set yourself realistic expectations. First of all, muscle growth is a slow process. It takes years to make a meaningful difference to your physique after your initial beginner gains, which are the fastest gains you'll ever make when you start training for the first time ever. Moreover, if a certain body part holds more fat than others, and it's stubborn fat, then it's going to be challenging for the muscle mass underneath to appear more visible, even when it grows. Last but not least, as I explained at the beginning of the episode, since genetics play a significant role in dictating your fat storage pattern, you want to compare your current and future physique to your starting point, not to other people's physique. So while building muscle can help with stubborn fat, don't expect it to make a noticeable difference overnight. And secondarily, even in the long term, appreciate that you may never look like your favorite athlete who has a different fat storage pattern and different stubborn areas than you do. So to wrap this up, takeaway number 1, body fat distribution depends primarily on sex and genetics, with some areas being more stubborn than others, I can speak, and requiring a longer time spent dieting to lean out. Takeaway number 2, building muscle can help you gain definition in any area of interest, even without necessarily dieting and therefore being in a calorie deficit to lose that body fat. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Short, sharp, and effective, just like your next fat loss phase if you hire me as your coach. That was smooth, wasn't it? And if you do want to hire me, the link is in the show notes, together with all the other links to the resources I mentioned, my newsletter, my blog posts, and my Instagram account if you want to connect with me. So thank you very much for tuning in, And until the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.